So in January of 1969, the Beatles... That's my... Those are the pipes in my building, by the way. This is what I deal with on a daily basis because I live in a New York apartment. Hey everyone, JT here, and I just finished watching the Beatles Get Back documentary on Disney+. If I look a little worse for wear, I had a Beatles gig of all things in Pennsylvania last night. Had 2 shows, had to drive there, drive back, unload all my gear, and wake up this morning and watch the rest of the documentary. So I'm not going to ask how's my hair this time. But let's talk about the Beatles Get Back. So for those of you who don't know, Get Back is a documentary chronicling the Beatles' infamous Let It Be project. And this time it has been reimagined by Peter Jackson of Lord of the Rings fame. And I'll just cut right to the chase. I think it's fantastic. I mean, as a guy who is not only a big Beatles fan, obviously is a guy in Beatles tributes, and has had so many questions about that whole period of their career, it really does answer a lot of questions. But it's also 3 parts that are 2.5 hours long each. So it's long. It's very long. And there's a lot of moments where somebody like me, who just likes being a fly on the wall of their conversations or the things that they're doing, loves watching all these things. I think for casual fans or people just getting into the Beatles, it might be a bit much. So I think you gotta go in there just knowing that this is a very raw, very long documentary that is meant to make you see pretty much everything as it happened. I have seen the original Let It Be documentary that was released back in 1970. I think the original documentary is a little rough around the edges. It seems a little directionless at times. The album was sort of remixed and re-envisioned by Phil Spector, and he added all these orchestral parts that Paul famously hated. Although what's funny about Lawn and Winding Road, he's always said he hated the orchestral parts in the Lawn and Winding Road, and then all of a sudden there's a conversation with George Martin and Paul McCartney, and George's like, are you going to want strings on this? I think you were talking about having strings. Paul's like, oh, I don't know. So it's interesting to hear that conversation. Like I said, it answers a lot of questions I've always had about this period. In January of 1969, the Beatles had the idea to perform a live show of brand new material, and they were going to film their rehearsals in Twickenham Studios. They got Michael Lindsay-Hogg to film this, but the problem was that the Beatles were at a very tense period in their career. They had just done the White Album, and there was a lot of infighting. Ringo left the band for a couple of days. I think George was starting to get fed up with, writing all this material and not really feeling like he was included. And obviously John was now with Yoko Ono, and that's a whole other can of worms that the internet really gets into. And Paul was just kind of, I think, trying to keep it all together. So this seemed like, okay, this is a new idea. We've done Sgt. Pepper with all the crazy overdubs and the orchestration and all the studio tricks. Let's go back to bare bones. Let's, be a rock and roll band. Let's do this all live like we did in Hamburg and Liverpool and everything. So that's really the basic idea of the Get Back project originally. Unfortunately, as you see in the documentary, things got very tense very fast. And there's a couple reasons for this. I mean, first of all, you've got Paul McCartney, who's basically taking over the reins of the Beatles, especially since Brian Epstein has died. They talk about that. And there's times when Paul does come off as a little bit of a control freak because Paul's very sure about what it is that he wants to do. He's very sure. He has like pretty much the whole arrangement of these songs in his head. So he'll be telling George, like, I want you to play this. And George famously says, oh, I don't mind. I'll play whatever you want me to play. Or I won't play at all if you don't want me to. Ringo's just there to play drums. And John, I gotta tell you, watching this, you just see John. He looks hurt, man. It's been well documented that John and Yoko were taking heroin at this time. And there's just times when you look at John and you're just like, God, he just looks like he's not even there. And meanwhile, George, it seems like, is really kind of who's gone through this unbelievable growth as a musician and a writer. You know, he's just come back from hanging out with Bob Dylan at Woodstock and writing all these songs that are going to be on All Things Must Pass. And he's trying to get his ideas out there and feeling like he keeps being shot down. There's this really, really sad moment that I've always known about this, where but it's interesting to finally see this on tape. George brings in the song I Me Mine, you know, fitting title considering all that was going on. And John is just very dismissive of it. He's just like, you know, a rock and roll group, you know, what's all this waltzing? I'll waltz with Yoko. And George actually says, you know, I don't give a fuck whether you have it or not. I mean, it's very passive aggressive. And this led to George leaving the band for a few days. And that's the end, basically, of the first episode. It's really fascinating because I've known a lot of these things. I've actually seen a lot of bootleg footage of outtakes from Let It Be. And I've heard there's like a lot of audio clips on YouTube you can hear. But to actually see it and see it all included it's an experience. One of the things I've always known is that a lot of songs that were going to be on All Things Must Pass were rehearsed during Let It Be. And there's this one great moment where George brings in All Things Must Pass, the song, and they start working on it. And you can tell John and Paul are interested in it. They're like, well, this is interesting. Let's work on the song. And there's this great moment where George has written out the words, and there's the line, he has a line called, "The wind can blow those clouds away." And John, who has otherwise seemed kind of not really there, he suggests a mind can blow those clouds away, which is what the line would eventually be. And it's like, wow, I never knew that John came up with that line. That's cool. And then at one point, they're doing Gimme Some Truth from John's Imagine album. And I was surprised to find out that Gimme Some Truth, Paul and John were working on it. In fact, Paul seemed to remember it better than John did. You get to see Paul, who's very frustrated about what's going on, just kind of in desperation, like trying to write Get Back. And the whole way that song evolves throughout the project is pretty remarkable. They come in with I've Got a Feeling. My radiator obviously really likes that song, and Don't Let Me Down, a whole bunch of stuff like that. But it's very obvious that in Twickenham, they're just miserable. It just looks like the most miserable experience you've ever seen in your life. And it gets kind of draining. Like, it's fascinating, but it's draining. And Yoko's there all the time. You know, and she was there obviously for the White Album sessions as well. And it's not that the other Beatles spouses don't come in. Linda comes in quite often, but she tends to take pictures a lot. Like, she feels like she's adding something to the experience. You see Patty, George Harrison's wife, come in for one scene. Maureen Starkey comes in a couple of times, but they're like cameo appearances. Even Peter Sellers comes in at one point. But Yoko is just always there, and it's this odd presence. It just feels like this kind of intrusion. Like, sometimes it looks like, you know, she's working on an art piece or, you know, something, but half of the time she's just not doing anything. She's just sitting there. You know, like you see Glyn Johns, like he's coming up with a lot of ideas musically, and there's this big back and forth between Michael Lindsay-Hogg, who's got all these crazy ideas. We're going to go out into the Middle East and we're going to play a show there. And Ringo's like, well, I don't want to play a show there. And, you know, they want to do it at a venue in London. And obviously, eventually, they would end up going up to the roof. So there's just always this back and forth with all these different cooks in the kitchen. Even George Martin doesn't really seem that hands-on in this documentary. It's kind of odd. I guess George Martin just sort of felt like, well, what am I doing here? I'm not here to add orchestrations. Anytime I say something, they just dismiss me. So, you know, the Beatles are just going to do whatever they want. I've always known that when George left, Yoko basically took George's mic and just started screaming into it in the way you know that Yoko screams. Ah! It's kind of a fitting visual for what's happened to the Beatles. And then there's this, I was shocked that this was in the documentary. I've always known this exchange where John is talking to Michael Lindsay-Hogg about what happened with George, and he's saying, we're going to get Eric Clapton instead, you know, screw George. And Yoko just goes into the mic and goes, John! 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 It's like, it's insane, really. And John is just like, just enabling it. It's like, it's such a weird dynamic. And I'm shocked that Yoko signed off on that. Like, it's funny, my dad and I always used to talk about, like, why Let It Be has never been re-released on DVD or anything like that. And my dad always had the idea, is like, I bet you it's being held up because of Yoko. There's probably a lot of things, that documentary, that Yoko doesn't want the public to see. And yeah, there's a couple of things, but to her credit, there are moments when she looks like she's enjoying, or there's like a couple moments when you see her and Linda having a conversation, and, you know, it's like, you know, and even like for her crazy, like, you know, dolphin noise singing, like, it seems like sometimes Ringo and Paul kind of get a kick out of it. So it's just this crazy situation that's going on. And then later they talk about Alan Klein. And what's funny is Glyn Johns actually says, I don't know if I trust that guy. He's not somebody I would trust. And Glyn Johns worked with the Rolling Stones, so the Rolling Stones famously told Paul, don't use Alan Klein. So that's, I mean, it's almost like all these elements that are going to lead to the Beatles' demise are all surfacing. There's a point where George says, I want to just make my own album. I'm just going to go make my own album because I've got all these songs. And John and Yoko are like, yeah, go do it, man, you know. So yeah, it's just amazing to see the seeds of all these events that are going to unfold in the Beatles' career. Even so many songs come up from Abbey Road are being worked on here. You see him working on Maxwell's Silver Hammer, which is in the original Let It Be documentary. Paul plays Oh Darlin'. George brings in an early version of Something. She Came In Through the Bathroom Window, Polythene Pam, Mean Mr. Mustard, even Her Majesty, Golden Slumbers. I mean, you can see it's like they've already got all these incredible songs. The second episode starts with Paul explaining what's going on, and then there's a conversation between John and Paul where they have a hidden microphone in a flower pot. You know, and remember, this is 1969. It's not like that was very common at that time. Or if it was more just like a thing that Richard Nixon did or whatever. And there's this private conversation between John and Paul, and you're like, oh my God. A lot of truths are revealed. They move to Apple Studios in the basement where they're like, well, you know, George is going to come back. So let's just finish making the record over there. And Magic Alex, who was this crazy engineer guy they had hired, said he was going to build the state-of-the-art studio. And when they found what he had, they said it was a disaster. It was just this bunch of nonsense. It was a bunch of noise, a buzz, like everything was terrible. So they had to rush to gut the entire studio and bring in the 8-track mobile recording unit. So it's like, God, what else can go wrong in this thing? And then I tell you, man, Billy Preston, they invite Billy Preston in, who he's in England to do a TV show, I think. And while he's there, they say, hey, do you want to play on the album? And Billy's, you know, I mean, Billy's got such a positive, like, fun personality. And I swear to God, it's night and day when Billy walks in. Just the minute he lays into the Fender Rhodes on I've Got a Feeling, I mean, the music is elevated, like, unbelievably so. And the mood is so different. John perks up. All of a sudden, John is taking the leadership role. He's, you know, really into it, and he's, you know, the John that we all know. It feels like the Beatles again. And, you know, this one outside force has just given them the spark that they need. George Martin famously said that. And from then on, it starts getting a lot of fun. And once they're tight, man, they sound fantastic. You know, there's moments when they're just kind of goofing around and stuff and you enjoy it. But, I mean, Paul especially. Paul is just on fire singing and playing, and George is playing lots of great lead lines. Ringo is just there, solid as a rock. And John starts to find his groove. Like, now John's feeling like John again. One of the interesting things, like I said, this answers a lot of questions I've always had. And one of them was, well, who came up with the idea to go up on the roof? And you see the moment when Glyn Johns and Michael Lindsay-Hogg go up to Paul and they say, hey, let's do it on the roof. And Paul kind of goes, And yeah, it's amazing also the timeline, because I've seen Let It Be many, many times, and I'm never sure like what came from what day. So you see the timeline. Like Peter Jackson does a great job of showing each day. Like you see the calendar and they'll cross out every day that happens and tell you what the next day is. And they'll have like a goal. Like they had the live shows that they were originally going to do that got scrapped. First they got moved, then they got scrapped altogether. Now it's the rooftop show, but there's bad weather, so now they're going to move the rooftop show over here. Another great thing that happens is like they'll do all these takes of all these songs, and they will say, this was the take that appeared on Let It Be. But they get on the rooftop, and I've seen the rooftop concert many times for a lot of bootlegs from it. And you see these multiple camera angles, all being on split screens. So you get to get this grand scale of this concert that they're doing. And I really have a newfound respect for that rooftop concert. They sound so good. Even the moments when they make some screw-ups, like there's a great screw-up I love when they're doing Don't Let Me Down, and John sings like, and which is great. And they kept it in the Let It Be film, and I'm glad they kept it here as well, because it's just a great moment. It's this little happy accident that happens. And then you get to see what's going on with the police, what's going on the street level. The police come in, they have a hidden camera in the lobby, and it's just like, it's so well done. It's just, it's one of those things where you start watching the documentary and you think, oh God, this is so draining and so awful, and it's, God, this was like the most miserable project ever, and in many ways it was. But the way it evolves to the point where by the end they're making this classic music. I mean, just one after another, one after 909. I mean, even that song, which isn't the greatest song they ever made, the performance is killer. It sounds great, and they're on the roof in the cold, and they're just playing it. And then at the end, you see them work out the last couple of songs, Let It Be, The Long and Winding Road, and Two of Us. And you're just kind of sit there kind of amazed at what you just watched. I really have to give Peter Jackson credit. I mean, this must have been a lot of work. I mean, we're talking, I think, did they say they had like 60 hours of footage or something like that? And like 150 hours of audio footage, or existing audio. I mean, the amount of work that must have gone in to not just present this, but turn it into a narrative and try to make a lot of this footage usable, because there's a lot of times when you can't see who's talking or you can't see who's playing, and they have to use other footage in order to show you what's actually happening. My final thoughts about the Get Back documentary by Peter Jackson is it's fantastic. I think if you're a Beatles fan, you gotta watch it. If you're just like a casual fan of rock and roll, or you're just somebody who wants to see a cool documentary, I recommend it, but I would say that it's a commitment. It's definitely a commitment, and there's going to be a lot of moments that a non-musician will watch and go, why did they include this? This doesn't seem all that interesting, or this just seems like they're rambling about nothing. I mean, I think for anybody who's been waiting to see a re-release of Let It Be all these years, I mean, this is like more than I ever imagined would ever come out. And if I do have one gripe, it's that I would have liked full performances of like when they do Let It Be. That's in the original Let It Be documentary and The Long and Winding Road. They only kind of show snippets of that while the credits are rolling. That's the only thing I would have changed, maybe the full performance of Get Back. But you can see those on YouTube. You can see those anywhere these days. You can see it in the anthology. So everyone, those are my thoughts on Get Back, which is streaming on Disney+. And let me know what your thoughts are. Did you like it? Did you think it was long? Or did you want to see more? Or is this something you've always been waiting for? Comment below. Let me know your thoughts. Take care. I'll see you all soon.